All right, get ready for a wild ride because today we're diving headfirst into the world of early brain development.
Yeah, we're talking about the incredible journey from a single cell to the most complex organ in the known universe.
It's like taking a master class in brain construction, and we've got the blueprints right here.
We're going to break down exactly how your brain goes from basically nothing to the intricate network of billions of neurons that make you you.
And hold on to your hats because we're also going to explore how this mind-blowing biological process might actually connect to spiritual growth.
It's a fascinating intersection of science and spirituality that will make you rethink the very essence of transformation.
But first things first, let's talk about those cellular blank slates, those stem cells.
Right, stem cells have the amazing ability to transform into any cell in the body, kind of like those Lego blocks that can become a spaceship or a castle.
So how do they go from being those undefined cells to this specialized neurons and glia that make up the brain?
Well, that's where genes and signals come into play like the master architects of this whole process.
Okay, so the genes are like the blueprint, but what's actually telling those cells which part of the blueprint to follow?
Think of it like this. Your DNA has all the instructions, but not all of them are active at the same time.
It's like having a giant cookbook, but you only use certain recipes at certain times.
Exactly. So specific genes get switched on and off, guiding those stem cells to specialize into the different cell types needed to build a brain.
Okay, so what's flipping those genetic switches? Is there like a tiny electrician inside our cells?
Not quite an electrician, but we do have these amazing things called transcription factors.
Transcription factors, those sound pretty important.
They are. These are proteins that bind to specific DNA sequences and control which genes are turned on or off.
So they're like the construction foreman, making sure the right blueprints are being followed for each part of the building.
Exactly. They're calling the shots, directing traffic, and making sure everything runs smoothly.
Wow, it's incredible how this all works together. But how do these cellular building blocks actually get organized into the actual structure of a brain?
Ah, well, that's where we get into the fascinating and slightly intimidating sounding stages of gastrulation and neurulation.
Okay, I have to admit, those names sound a little intense, like something out of a sci-fi movie. What's actually happening during these stages?
Imagine you're starting with a flat sheet of paper, and through some very precise folding and creasing, you create a three-dimensional origami crane.
Okay, I'm picturing it, kind of.
Well, that's essentially what's happening during gastrulation, but on a microscopic level with cells.
So gastrulation is like the first origami fold, setting the stage for the brain.
Exactly. It's a critical stage where the embryo transforms from a single layer of cells into multiple layers, one of which will become the entire nervous system.
And then neurulation comes in to refine those folds even further.
You got it. That's when that designated brain-building section of cells, called the neural plate, folds inward to create a groove.
And that groove eventually closes up to form the neural tube, which will become the brain and spinal cord.
Precisely. It's like origami with incredibly high stakes.
Because one wrong fold could lead to.
Serious birth defects, which is why getting enough folic acid during pregnancy is so crucial.
Wow, so it's all connected. But how do these cells know how to fold in the first place? Is there some kind of microscopic instruction manual they're following?
It's all about inductive signaling, which is basically a complex cellular conversation.
Cellular conversation. So they're like, hey, you, become a neuron, pass it on. We need more glial cells over here.
You got it. And these signals aren't just about what type of cell to become, they also guide cell migration, because neurons, once they're born, often have to travel quite a distance to reach their final destination in the brain.
Wait, so they're not just born in the right spot? That seems a little inefficient.
It's more like a perfectly choreographed dance, with each neuron having a specific role to play in the grand performance of brain development.
So how do these migrating neurons find their way? Are they following a scent, like breadcrumbs, or do they have some tiny compass?
You're closer than you think. They rely on a combination of chemical and physical cues to navigate, a bit like a GPS system for your brain.
So some are following a chemical scent, while others are using guideposts along the way.
Exactly. It's an incredible journey, and we're just getting started.
This is amazing. But before we get into those connections, let's take a quick pause here, and we'll be right back to delve even deeper into this incredible world of neural networking. All right, so we left off with those intrepid neurons navigating their way through the developing brain, following their internal GPS systems to find their designated spots. But the real magic happens when they arrive at their destination, right?
Absolutely. That's when we see the formation of trillions of connections between these neurons, creating a communication network more complex than any computer network we've ever built.
So how does this wiring process actually work? What's the scientific term for it?
It's called axonal outgrowth, and it involves each neuron sending out this long, slender cable called an axon to reach other neurons and form connections called synapses.
Synapses, those are like the bridges between neurons, right?
Exactly. They're the points of communication where information flows from one neuron to another in the form of chemical and electrical signals.
So we've got these axons reaching out, but how do they know where to go? Is it random? Or is there some kind of plan guiding them?
Oh, it's definitely not random. Axons have these incredible structures at their tips called growth cones that help them navigate.
Growth cones, what are those like?
Think of them like tiny hands reaching out, exploring the environment, searching for the right connection points.
So they're like little cellular explorers feeling their way through the brain.
Precisely. And these growth cones are incredibly sensitive. They're equipped with these finger-like projections called philopodia that can detect even subtle chemical cues in their surroundings.
So they're like little detectives sniffing out clues to guide them along the way.
You could say that. These chemical cues act like road signs, some attracting the axon towards a target and others repelling it, making sure it stays on the right path.
Okay, so that explains how axons find their way, but how do they know when they've found the right neuron to connect with? It's not just about finding a connection, it's about finding the correct connection, right?
You're exactly right. Neurons are incredibly picky about who they connect with, and this selectivity is crucial for ensuring the brain is wired correctly. One way they make sure this happens is through a process called tiling.
Tiling, like what you have on your bathroom floor?
Well, it's similar. Imagine a floor with tiles laid out perfectly, each one fitting snugly against its neighbors without any overlap. That's essentially what happens with neurons through tiling. They respect each other's boundaries to make sure their connections are organized and don't get in each other's way.
So the brain has its own built-in organizational system to keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. And it's thanks to a fascinating gene called DSCAM that stands for Down syndrome cell adhesion molecule that this all works.
So DSCAM helps to prevent neurons from making the wrong connections, kind of like making sure everyone has a unique ID card. But we've got these connections forming. What keeps them alive and functioning? It's not a one-time thing, is it?
It's like a garden. You need more than just seeds in the ground, right? You need sunlight, water, and nutrients to help those plants thrive. It's the same with the brain. We need specific elements to make sure those connections, those synapses, stay healthy and strong.
So what are the nutrients that keep those connections healthy?
These nutrients are called neurotrophins, and they're crucial for the survival, growth, and development of neurons. Think of them as care packages that are sent to neurons to keep them going.
So it's like a constant feedback loop of encouragement and support.
Yes. And there are many types of neurotrophins, each doing its own job. For example, we have nerve growth factor, or NGF, which is vital for our sense of touch, and then brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which is super important for learning and memory.
So NGF is like the brain's way of saying, hey, don't forget about feeling things, and BDNF is like, let's make those memories stick. This is fascinating. But it's not just a one-time thing, right? Our brains are always changing and adapting, aren't they?
Absolutely. One of the most remarkable things about the brain is its plasticity, its ability to change and adapt throughout our entire lives. And a big part of this plasticity has to do with how dynamic synapses are.
Okay, so when you say dynamic, what do you mean? Are you saying that those connections aren't permanent?
You got it. Synapses are constantly changing in response to our experiences, kind of like they're being remodeled throughout our lives. This ability of synapses to strengthen or weaken, depending on how much we use them, is called synaptic plasticity.
So every time we learn something new, have a new experience, make a new memory, those tiny connections in our brains are being reshaped and rewired.
Exactly. It's like taking a different route to work. The more you travel that route, the more familiar it becomes. The same thing happens in the brain. The more we use a specific neural pathway, those connections get stronger.
So our brains are like construction sites, constantly being rewired and remodeled in response to life's experiences. That's amazing, but it's also kind of a lot to think about.
It is remarkable. But like with any construction project, there's always the possibility for things to go wrong.
Right, because we've been talking about the ideal scenario, but things don't always go according to plan, do they?
Unfortunately, that's true. Just like a misplaced fold in origami, disruptions during brain development can lead to a variety of problems.
So we've been talking about this incredible process of brain development, but like you said, things don't always go perfectly smoothly, do they? What happens when there's a glitch in the system?
That's when things can get a little tricky, from a medical standpoint anyway, because even small disruptions to any of those finely tuned processes we've been discussing can sometimes have these ripple effects. They can
Mhm.
set things off balance and potentially lead to neurodevelopmental disorders.
So it's like a domino effect where one thing throws everything else off.
Exactly. Think about cell migration, for instance.
Hmm.
If those neurons don't end up in the right place during development, it can really mess with the brain circuitry and how well it functions.
Right. So those neurons are on the move, hopefully finding their way to the right spots. But then there's that whole other layer of complexity with all those trillions of connections they're making. Can things go wrong there, too?
Absolutely. If we have errors in axon guidance, where those axons don't quite hit the right target, it can cause some pretty significant problems. It's like trying to send a letter, but it gets delivered to the wrong address. That message isn't going to get through, which leads to miscommunication within the brain.
And those miscommunications, those glitches in the system, they can show up in so many different ways, right?
Exactly, and often in very complex ways that we're still trying to fully understand. Think about conditions like autism spectrum disorder or schizophrenia. We believe that disruptions in these early brain developmental processes play a role, although it's incredibly complex, and we're still piecing together all the puzzle pieces.
It's amazing, really. Something that seems like a minor detail, like a neuron slightly off course, can have such a profound impact on a person's life.
It speaks to just how delicate and intricate this process of brain development really is. And sometimes these disruptions are so subtle that we might not even realize they're happening. There might not be any visible physical differences, but they can still have a huge impact on things like learning, behavior, and mental health.
It's like having a software glitch in a computer. You don't necessarily see anything physically wrong, but the program just won't run the way it should.
That's a great analogy.
Hmm.
And this is why understanding these developmental processes is so crucial, especially when it comes to developing effective treatments and interventions. Because if we can pinpoint where things are going off track, we have a much better chance of stepping in early to minimize those long-term effects.
So the more we understand about the brain's blueprint and how it all comes together, the better equipped we are to address those glitches, those bumps in the road. It's about early detection and intervention.
Precisely. It's like having a detailed map of a city. If you know where traffic jams are likely to happen, you can reroute traffic or find other ways to keep things flowing smoothly. Early intervention, whether that's through therapy, medication, nutritional support, can truly make all the difference.
This has been such an incredible journey. It really gives you a whole new appreciation for the adaptability and sheer complexity of the brain, from those very first stem cells to this intricate network of trillions of connections.
It's awe-inspiring, really, when you
Yeah.
think about it. And as we uncover more about these intricate processes in neuroscience, we also start to notice some fascinating connections to other areas of human experience, like spiritual growth.
Right. We haven't even touched on that biblical passage yet, and I'm so curious to hear your take on how it all ties together.
Well, I kept coming back to that story of Jesus calling Levi, the tax collector, to follow him. It was really a radical move at the time, challenging societal norms and people's ideas about who deserved acceptance and redemption.
Yes, it was like Jesus was extending this hand of grace and acceptance to someone who is judged and ostracized by those around him.
Exactly. And that whole idea of radical inclusivity, of seeing beyond someone's perceived flaws and recognizing their inherent worth, it got me thinking about this concept in psychology called unconditional positive regard.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's about accepting and valuing people for who they are, regardless of their past mistakes or imperfections, right?
You got it. And it struck me that there's this beautiful parallel to brain development. Just like Jesus saw Levi's potential for growth and transformation, we need to approach our own brains and the brains of others with that same kind of compassion, understanding, and belief in their capacity for change.
I love that. It's about recognizing that we're all in a state of becoming and that we all have the potential for growth, no matter where we're starting from.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of creating environments for both ourselves and for future generations that nurture healthy brain development.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the amazing world of early brain development, what's the most important message you want our listeners to take away from this?
I think the key takeaway here is that our brains are not fixed or static. They're constantly changing, adapting, rewiring themselves in response to our experiences. We have this incredible capacity for growth, for healing, for change.
That's so empowering. It means that we are not defined by our past experiences or even by our genes. We have the power to shape our own brains, and in doing so, we can shape our own lives.
Precisely. So here's a thought to leave you with. If our brains are constantly being molded by our experiences, what choices can we make today to cultivate more fulfilling, meaningful lives for ourselves and for those around us?